The wind howled across the wasteland, blowing fine red dust over broken metal and shattered machines. A small figure walked slowly through the junkyard, her feet bare, her silver skin scratched and dirty. Her clothes were torn rags, barely hanging. On her thin frame, she didn't cry, because she had no tears left. She didn't speak, because no one ever listened. She just walked, one step at a time. Through the mountains of trash and scrap, the alien girl had no name now. The people who once owned her never gave her one. They used her, beat her, and left her here because even they had no use for something so broken. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, a soft blue light that made her easy to see at night. That's why she hid under piles of rusted steel when the sun went down. Hunters roamed the scraplands at night, looking for lost tech or lost people they could sell. That evening, the girl found a broken cargo shell, half buried in dirt and parts. She crawled inside and wrapped her arms around her knees, trying to stay warm. The cold cut through her skin, but she didn't shiver. She was too tired to feel anything. Then she heard footsteps, heavy, steady, not like the others. She held her breath, her heart racing, ready to run, but the steps stopped nearby. A human stood above her. He wore a patchy jacket made from old uniforms, his boots held together with tape and wire. He had a small beard, dust on his face, and strange eyes that didn't look at her like a tool. He looked at her like she mattered. "Hey," the human said gently. "You okay?" The girl didn't answer. She only backed away deeper into the shell, her glowing eyes full of fear. The man didn't move closer. Instead, he sat down a few feet away and opened a small pack. He pulled out a wrapped piece of bread, broke it in half, and placed one part near her. Then he leaned back and began eating the other half himself. "I'm Jake," he said after a while. "Just a scavenger." The girl looked at the bread but didn't touch it. It could be a trick, a trap, or poison, but Jake didn't force her. He simply stood up and walked away, leaving the food behind. She waited until his footsteps faded into the wind. Then she crawled forward and took the bread in her shaking hands. She ate it slowly, her body remembering hunger all too well. The next day, she saw Jake again. He was building something from junk, bending pipes, connecting wires, hammering panels. Together, he didn't look at her, but he left another piece of food on a flat rock nearby. This time she didn't wait as long. She grabbed it and ran, hiding again to eat. For days this continued. Jake never asked her to come out, never shouted, never chased her. He just worked, and always left a little something for her. One morning, the girl crept closer and watched him work. He was building a shelter, small, strange, but strong. He talked to himself as he worked, making jokes only he understood. Sometimes he sang badly, and she almost laughed. Jake knew she was watching. He never turned suddenly, never scared her. Instead, he made a second stool out of scrap and left it beside the fire pit. He didn't say it was for her, but she knew that night. She sat on it while he cooked a simple soup using rainwater and dried roots. He handed her a metal bowl carefully, like it was made of glass. She took it, held it close, and ate slowly, savoring every warm sip. Still, she said nothing. Still. She didn't trust completely, but in her heart, a small light began to flicker, one she thought had died long ago. Hope. The wind howled again that night, louder and colder. Jake added more metal sheets to the roof, sealing the shelter tight. As he worked, the girl curled up on the corner mat he made from old cables and cloth. She watched the fire glow. In the center, she watched the human who didn't ask for anything, yet gave her everything. In the darkness of the junkyard, where no one cared and nothing lived long, the alien girl closed her eyes for the first time without fear, because maybe, just maybe, this place of broken things was where she could start again. Not alone, not anymore. The morning air smelled like hot metal and old smoke, but the junkyard was quiet, peaceful in its own strange way. Jake stood beside his half-finished shelter, hands black with grease, a rusted wrench hanging from his belt. The girl watched him from behind a pile of old engine parts. her glowing eyes following every move. She didn't speak, didn't come close, but she was nearer than before. And Jake noticed, without saying a word. He pointed at a flat panel, then at a rusted frame on the ground. He was asking for help, not demanding it. The girl hesitated, then slowly stepped out, bare feet crunching on broken bolts and wires. She picked up the panel and carried it to him, arms trembling under its weight. He smiled, said nothing, but gave her a small nod, the kind that said more than words ever could. They worked like that all morning. Jake showed her what to do using simple gestures, never rushing, never scolding. The girl learned fast, her fingers gentle but clever, twisting wires, sorting bolts by size, wiping dirt from surfaces like it meant something. She didn't know why she helped him, but something inside her liked the sound of metal being fixed instead of broken. By noon, they had made real progress. Jake connected a cracked solar panel to a battery core, the wires sparking for a moment before glowing blue. The girl flinched, then smiled softly when the tiny bulb lit up over the doorway. For the first time in years, she saw light made not by fire, but by hope. Later, Jake handed her a chipped metal cup filled with lukewarm water. She took it carefully and sipped, staring at him like he was a puzzle. Why did this human help her, feed her, give her shelter, when everyone else had only taken? Jake leaned back against a pile of crushed drone parts and looked up at the sky. "You ever seen a sunrise from outside the city dome?" he asked, knowing she wouldn't answer. "I used to think I'd never see one again," he whispered, voice more tired than proud. The girl didn't understand all his words, but she understood the feeling, the kind of sadness that lived deep in the bones, the kind only the broken could recognize in each other. She sat near him, not close enough to touch, but closer than yesterday. Her hands were scratched, nails dark from work, but they didn't shake anymore. Jake noticed and quietly handed her an old cloth to wipe them. She took it, and for a second, their fingers almost touched, but she pulled away just before they did. That night, the wind blew stronger, rattling the thin roof above. Jake sealed the gaps with melted plastic and steel mesh, and the girl helped hold the corners, her small hands steady and brave. The fire between them crackled, warm and golden. Jake pulled out a small metal box, pressed a button, and soft music started playing. Old human music with gentle strings. The girl tilted her head, listening like she was hearing the stars breathe. Then, without warning, she hummed. It was just a tiny sound, quiet and unsure, but it was real. Jake looked at her, surprised, but didn't interrupt. She stopped as soon as she realized he heard, pulling her knees to her chest and hiding her face. He just smiled again and said, "That was nice." The girl turned her head away, but he saw her mouth twitch, a tiny smile trying to be born. She wasn't ready to trust, not fully, not yet, but something was changing, piece by piece, like the shelter they built together from garbage and ruins. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't strong, but it was theirs. And in a world where everything was thrown away, that meant something. When the fire died down and the wind grew colder, Jake laid back on his cot and whispered into the night, "Tomorrow we build the door." The girl nodded, barely moving, her glowing eyes reflecting the last of the flames. She didn't say a word, but inside her chest, her heart whispered something soft, something she hadn't dared believe for a long time. Maybe this place could become her home. Maybe this human really meant it. Maybe she didn't have to run anymore. Rain tapped gently on the scrap roof, soft and slow, like fingers on a forgotten drum. The junkyard smelled of wet iron and smoke, the kind of smell that soaked into clothes and never left. Jake stirred a bubbling pot of stew made from root bulbs and powdered grain, the firelight flickering against his tired face. Across from him, the alien girl sat cross-legged on the cold floor, her arms wrapped around her knees, watching, always watching. She had become quieter these days, not out of fear, but something else, something deeper. Jake didn't say much either, not anymore. They had built something stronger than words, silent teamwork. Shared glances, careful gestures. The walls were up now. Made from old Starship panels and fusion core shells, they had even added a door, one that opened and closed with a proud little creak. Jake liked that sound. It made the place feel real. That night, the stew smelled better than usual. Maybe because it had just a pinch of something green spice from a forgotten ration kit. Jake filled 2 small bowls and handed one to her without looking. She took it gently, her fingers brushing his just for a second. Jake smiled to himself, but said nothing. The girl held the bowl in both hands. Blowing softly over the steam, she watched the fire reflect in the stew. Watched it dance, and then her lips moved. Jake didn't hear anything at first. Maybe he wasn't supposed to, but then a soft word came out, like the wind slipping through old metal. Home. Jake froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. He looked at her slowly, like he wasn't sure he had heard right. Her eyes were down, her face still, but her lips were trembling slightly. He waited, letting the silence stretch between them like a bridge made of light. She looked up at him, her glowing blue eyes softer than before. Home, she said again, firmer this time, not loud but real. Jake didn't respond right away. He just let out a slow breath and smiled. Yeah, he whispered. It is. That was all. No questions, no praise, no shock. Just understanding. Later that night, while the wind howled outside like wild dogs, she helped him hang strips of cloth across the doorframe. Not for protection, but for warmth, for privacy. Her movements were careful, almost thoughtful, as if she finally cared about the place they had made. Jake gave her a small dented music box he found while scavenging. It didn't play perfectly, notes wobbled, and the tune skipped. But her eyes widened with wonder when she turned the little crank and heard it sing. She cradled it like something sacred, something precious. The next morning, she woke up before Jake. She swept the floor with a piece of torn fabric, wiped the tools, stacked the empty cans neatly. When Jake opened his eyes and saw her quietly working, he didn't say a word. He just sat up slowly and watched her, heart heavy in the best way. She pointed at a loose board and then at the tool rack. Jake understood, handed her a wrench, and together they knelt by the wall to fix it. She said nothing else that day, but she didn't need to. Her first word had said everything he needed to hear. As the sun set behind the heaps of wrecked machines, the shelter glowed warm from the firelight inside. They sat side by side, not touching, not talking, just breathing in the same quiet air. In a world full of noise, pain, and lost, silence was finally a gift. Outside, the wind whispered over scrap hills. Inside, the girl held the music box close and listened to its broken melody. And when Jake fell asleep in his cot, the girl glanced at him once, then quietly whispered one more word into the darkness. Jake. It was clumsy, awkward, but her voice didn't shake. She looked at him, curled in sleep like a tired animal, and felt something she had forgotten how to feel: safe. She laid back on her cloth mat, eyes wide open, and for the first time in her life, she hoped tomorrow would come. The first sign came in the form of silence. Not the usual calm silence they had grown used to, but a heavy kind, like the air itself was holding its breath. Jake stood near the outer fence of scrap metal he had arranged over the weeks, just checking for gaps. He felt something strange in his chest, like a chill that didn't belong to the weather. Behind him, the girl Nali was sweeping ash from the fire pit, her silver fingers moving with care. She paused too, sensing it, her glowing eyes flicking to the dark horizon beyond, the rusted hills. That night, the wind didn't blow, the junkyard didn't creak, and even the distant sounds of roaming machines had vanished. Jake locked the door early and added extra weight to the latch. He didn't tell her why, but she already knew. She didn't speak, just moved closer to him, not touching, but near enough to feel his warmth. Then it happened. A soft click outside, followed by the hum of unfamiliar engines. Not the sound of junk machines or scavenger bikes, no. This was cleaner, smoother, like someone with real gear. Jake slowly grabbed the old blaster he had kept hidden under the floor panel. He hadn't used it in years, but his hands remembered. How Nally backed into the corner, her breath short and sharp, her body trembling not from cold, but memory. Then came the voice, not human, deep and oily. Like metal scraping glass. "We know you're in there, little ghost," it said in her language, a language Jake didn't understand. Nally pressed her hands over her ears, but the voice kept going. "You can't hide in garbage forever." Jake looked at her, confused. She looked back, her face pale. And then for the first time she spoke in full human words. "They're here for me." Before Jake could ask who, the door shook, something heavy slamming into it from outside. He aimed his blaster and yelled, "Back off!" Another hit. Louder, and the latch cracked slightly. Nally rushed forward and placed her hand on the inner wall, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. "I can stop them for a moment," she whispered. Jake stared at her hand, which now glowed against the metal like it was charging something. The walls vibrated with soft energy, and the next slam from outside didn't break through. It worked, but she was shaking, draining fast. Outside, another voice spoke, this one rough and angry. "If you don't open the door, we'll tear this trash heap apart." Jake looked around quickly, grabbed a pack, threw in some food, water. "A small energy cell. We have to run," he said. But Nally didn't move. She looked toward the ceiling, her voice shaking. "They'll never stop. They'll hunt me always." Jake stepped closer, knelt in front of her, and spoke clearly. "Then we give them something they weren't ready for." He pulled her gently to her feet, and together they moved to the back hatch, the one hidden under broken solar plates. Jake opened it just as the front door burst inward, light pouring into the small home they had built together. Nally looked back once, eyes full of sorrow, watching the place they made be swallowed by darkness and noise. But she didn't cry. She reached into her side pouch and tossed a small core. Behind them, it hit the floor and exploded in a flash of white, blinding light and screaming static. As they crawled out into the cold night, Jake shielded her with his body, heart pounding but steady. They ran between mountains of metal and bone, their feet splashing through puddles of fuel and rain. Far behind, the voices screamed in confusion, searching. But the junkyard was big, and Jake knew every corner of it. He pulled Nally into an old freight shell and slammed it shut, both of them breathing hard in the dark. For a while, neither spoke. Then Nally turned to him and said something Jake would never forget. "You could have left me," she whispered. Jake shook his head slowly, wiping dirt from her cheek. "You're not trash," he said softly. "Not to me." Outside, the hunters spread through the junk, angry and loud. But inside the freight shell, two hearts beat quietly, side by side, one human, one alien. And somewhere between broken metal and starlight, trust was reforged again, stronger than before. The rain had stopped, but the metal world around them still dripped like it was crying. Jake crouched in silence, eyes locked on the cracked scanner in his hand. It buzzed faintly, warning him that the strangers were still close. Too close. Beside him, Nally sat with her back against a rusted tank. Her hands clenched, her breath shaky but sharp. She had barely spoken since they escaped, but her eyes were fierce now, no longer full of fear. They had lost their shelter, their fire, their quiet life built from scraps, Jake thought. She might break again, like she had before, but instead, she whispered something cold and steady. "We make them leave." Jake blinked at her, surprised. She didn't look like the frightened girl he first found in the junkyard. Now she looked like someone who had already survived too much to run anymore. He nodded once, slowly. "We'll need traps," he said, "and a lot of junk." By daylight, they were working, not speaking much, just moving fast. Jake set up wire triggers between towers of metal, connecting rusted parts to pressure plates. Nally climbed higher, using her strange energy touch to fuse broken lights and fuel cells together. They made fake signals, false power surges, and unstable bomb scrap turned into teeth. They had only hours before the hunters circled back. Jake handed Nally a small stun disc from his belt. It might only work once, he said. She looked at it, then tucked it carefully into the cloth belt tied around her waist. When the sun dipped low again and the sky turned orange like rusted fire, they waited. Hidden between two shattered transport ships, Jake kept the blaster ready. Nally sat beside him, her hands pressed to the wall, eyes closed, feeling for movement. Then she said it, barely above a whisper. "They're here." Shadows moved through the junk. Creeping, hunting. 3 of them this time, tall masked, cloaked in tech far too clean for this world. One stepped on the tripwire, and a tower of metal arms fell like a beast, slamming into him with a roar. He screamed, sparks flying from his armor as he tried to crawl out. The other 2 split up, smarter now, but Jake and Nally were ready. One followed a false signal and triggered a sonic burst. His helmet cracked, his balance lost. Jake charged from behind and slammed a pipe into his back, knocking him down hard. Blaster fire lit the dark for a moment, blue bolts hissing through smoke. Nally found the 3rd one climbing the ledge near their hiding place. He raised his weapon, but she didn't run. Instead, she slammed the stun disc onto the metal wall beside him, then kicked it hard. The burst knocked them both down, but she rolled fast and grabbed the hunter's wrist. She pressed her hand over his armor. Light flickered, then his suit shorted out, collapsing him into stillness. Jake ran to her, pulling her back, checking her for wounds. "I'm okay," she whispered, shaking. "I did it." They stood there for a long moment, surrounded by smoke and the groans of defeated enemies. Jake looked at the mess, the sparks, the silence after chaos. "We just won," he muttered, almost in disbelief. Nally didn't smile, but her eyes glowed softly, proudly. "We protected it," she said. "Even if it's gone, it was ours." Jake looked at her, this strange, silver-skinned girl who had once hidden under trash and silence. Now she stood tall, shoulders straight, hands steady, not because she was fearless, but because she had chosen to be brave. That night, they camped inside the wreck of an old cargo hauler. Jake started a fire with what little fuel he had left. Nally sat beside him, wrapping her arms around her knees like she used to, but not to hide, just to feel the warmth. She spoke quietly, more words than before. "They used to call me property," she said. "Not person, not child, just something they owned." Jake stared into the fire, his fists tight. "They'll never call you that again," he said. She nodded once. Then, with a voice still uncertain but stronger than ever, she asked, "Can we build again?" Jake looked up at the stars peeking through the holes in the cargo roof. He smiled, small but sure. "Yes," he said, "we build again." Asterisk. The sun rose slow over the junkyard horizon, casting golden light on twisted towers of old machines. Smoke still floated from the places where the traps had fired the night before. Jake stood alone near a broken satellite dish, staring into the wreckage. He wasn't searching for enemies now, he was searching for answers. Something about the attackers had bothered him, the way they moved, the tech they carried. It didn't feel like random slavers. Back in the cargo hauler, Nally sat on a pile of folded cloth, holding something strange in her hands. It was a black chip, flat and cold, pulled from the inside pocket of one of the fallen hunters. She had found it after the fight, but hadn't told Jake yet. Something about it called to her, made her chest feel tight and heavy. She pressed it against the back of her neck, where her skin had a faded mark, a square scar she never understood. The chip clicked, then flashed blue. Her eyes widened as a soft voice filled the air around her. A woman's voice, warm, strong, and familiar in a way that made her heart freeze. "If you're hearing this," the voice said, "you are my daughter, and you are alive." Nally didn't blink, didn't breathe. She sat frozen as the message played. The voice continued, "You were taken from me during the fall of our world. I was forced to send this data chip with the hope that someday, somehow, it would reach you." Nally pressed her fingers to her chest, the beating in her heart wild and confused. "I named you Nelitha," the voice said. "Not slave, not tool. You were born royal." Jake stepped in quietly then. Hearing only the last few words, Nali looked up, her lips parted, eyes wet but not crying. She handed him the chip, saying only, "My mother." He played the message again, and this time he listened with her. Each word felt heavier than the last. Nali, the quiet girl from the junk piles, the one who didn't speak, who curled up in corners like a shadow. She wasn't just someone who had been thrown away. She had been taken from power, from family, from a life she never knew. When the message ended, silence filled the room again. Jake sat beside her, unsure of what to say. She broke it first, voice soft but clear. "They hunted me because of what I was." Jake nodded slowly. "And now they know where you are." They both looked at the chip again, its glow fading slowly. It didn't just hold a message, it had also sent a signal. Somebody out there knew it had been activated. "We don't run this time," Nali said, her voice steady. Jake looked at her, surprised but proud. She wasn't afraid anymore, not of her past, not of what she might become. "We'll need help," he said. "More scrap, more power, maybe. Even allies." Nali stood up, taller than he had ever seen her. She went to the back wall, pressed her glowing hand against a dead console. It sparked, blinked, then flickered to life. Ancient symbols glowed across its surface, and a small map lit up in green. She pointed to a spot far beyond the junkyard, where desert met ruined mountains. "There's something there," she whispered. "My memory. It's not clear, but I feel it." Jake stood beside her, staring at the blinking dot. "Then we go," he said. "We find what they tried to bury." Outside, clouds rolled in heavy and dark, the wind picking up dust and sparks. But inside the old hauler, something brighter was building, a fire in the heart, a purpose in the silence. Nali was no longer hiding. She didn't want to just survive anymore. She wanted to understand. She wanted to fight back, not just for herself but for every piece of her past they tried to erase. The wind howled over the junk dunes, carrying the scent of fuel, ash, and something older, something buried for years. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead as he tightened the last bolt on the hover sled, made from old cargo runners and repurposed. Fans beside him, Nali stood still, a long cloth wrapped around her shoulders, her silver skin streaked with dust, but her eyes glowing like stars trapped in stone. They had traveled far from the shelter, through forgotten crash sites and machine graveyards. Now they stood at the edge of a canyon, the walls lined with bones of old ships and rusted weapons. At the bottom, half buried in sand and shadow, was the thing that had called to Nali for days. A door, covered in ancient markings, pulsing faintly with blue light, alive but asleep. Nali stepped forward slowly, one hand reaching out, her fingers shaking just slightly. The moment she touched the symbol at the center, the canyon trembled. The door split open with a deep sigh, and warm air rushed out like breath held for centuries. Inside was not ruin, but memory. Lights flickered on, revealing a hidden chamber lined with crystal panels. Holograms danced to life, showing images of Nali as a child. Laughing, held in her mother's arms, Jake stood behind her, silent, watching the truth unfold in light and sound. Nali dropped to her knees, overwhelmed, her hands pressed to her face. "I wasn't just lost," she whispered. "I was taken, suddenly." Alarms blared through the chamber, red symbols flashing. Jake pulled his scanner and cursed under his breath. "They followed us." Outside, ships broke through the sky like falling stars, sleek and black. They didn't send warnings this time, just opened fire. Nali grabbed Jake's hand and pulled him into a side tunnel, her voice calm despite the chaos. "There's something here they don't want us to find." They ran through halls of broken memory, past rooms full of relics and recordings. At the core, they found an old command throne, glowing softly. Waiting, symbols floated above it, matching the ones Nali had drawn in her sleep since the message. Jake looked at her, breathless. "This was your mother's." Nali stepped forward and sat, slowly, carefully, like the seat would reject her. Instead, the lights flared brighter, the chamber hummed to life. Outside, The ships hovered over the canyon, preparing the final strike, but the ground shifted before they could fire. Massive panels rose from the sand, ancient defenses powering. And after decades of silence, cannon towers spun with groans, shields burst into existence. And the sky turned blinding white. The enemy ships panicked, pulling back, firing wildly. But the ancient system was stronger than they expected, smarter, faster, brutal. Jake ran to Nali's side, shielding her as explosions rocked the structure. She was glowing now, her body pulsing with the same light as the machines around her. "I remember," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "This was our legacy." One by one, the attackers fell, retreating as the sky lit with flame and thunder. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. When it was over, Jake pulled her into a quiet embrace. "You brought it back," he whispered. "You brought everything back." They returned to the junkyard days later, tired but alive. Nali didn't walk like a runaway anymore. She walked like someone who had come home. Not to the past, but to what she built in the present. They rebuilt the shelter, stronger this time. Others began to arrive, runaways, scavengers, castaways. From forgotten wars, they came not for food, not for shelter, but for hope. And Nali gave it freely. Jake watched her speak to the others, teaching them to build from nothing, to trust in pieces, to rise again. She still didn't say much, but every word she spoke carried power now, because it wasn't just her voice that mattered, it was her presence, her fire, her choice to stay one night. As stars blinked down on the junkyard, Jake sat beside her and asked, "Do you miss the palace, the life they stole from you?" Nali shook her head slowly and smiled. "I didn't lose a palace," she said. "I found a home." And in the heart of a broken world, where machines once ruled and people were forgotten, a girl who had nowhere to go became the center of everything. Because one human built her a home from scrap, and she turned it into something eternal.